6. Yeah, let them do your startup and everything.
Oh, I haven't heard from her. Y'all heard from Claudina?
No.
She said she was coming. Got connected this time.
Oh, really? Oh, that's funny.
I didn't even recognize her first.
Do you see people on a contract?
Yeah.
I love it when that happens. They're not very expensive.
All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and open up our meeting. We are going to have two additions to the agenda. We'll go ahead and start with, since we did not have a meeting in June, we won't have any minutes to approve. So we'll go right into the agenda. The first thing, Zip, I've passed out the blueprint of the new pavilion for Stowe Park.
Yeah, this is the pavilion for Stowe Park, and hopefully we'll be able to get this thing ordered pretty soon. It'll probably take about 4 or 5 weeks for it to come. We're trying to get this pavilion, along with 2 other projects down at Stowe Park, started, because we'll have a slowdown period at the end of August. That'll be replacing the steps, doing some work on the bank, and improving the sidewalks and the pavilion. So all those 3 projects will be going on at the same time. And I think we looked at this renderings at 1 or 2 meetings ago, and y'all sort of approved it then, that y'all liked it. So we moved forward with it in ordering this.
That's great. Anybody have any questions or anything? The other thing is we all received the email about the grant for the play unit at Linford Park.
Yes, and we did get that grant. That was $30,000. That was a Meet Me at the Park grant for Linford Park. It's an inclusive play unit. We're hoping to try to get that kicked off. We already sent out the news release to the papers and stuff. I think it was a pretty nice article in the Belmont Banner. But we need to do another release. August the 10th, we're going to try to do the brown grading ceremony out there. That'll be at 10 a.m., so we need all y'all that can attend, because we need to get a Photoshop to be able to send it to the Disney Corporation. And it won't last long. We'll try to have some shovels and some hard hats, and we'll scope out the ground and all that stuff. August the 10th, yeah, at 10 a.m. So we'll put it out there on Facebook and everywhere if y'all want to invite other people. But it shouldn't take us long to do that. We just need a photo op for the, like I said, for the NRPA and the Disney. So if you want, get some other people to attend or whoever, that would be great. And I ordered that play unit last week, and it's also a 5-week process for it to come back. So hopefully it'll be back, and I think the scheduled installation date is September the 1st for installation. We have to have the whole project completed by December the 1st, so it's going to give us plenty of time to be able to get that in and to improve that park. I think it's going to be a nice addition to Linford Park.
And we don't have anybody for public comment, or do we? I think so.
Yeah, and just to follow up on one thing that's not on the agenda, the cameras, we're working on getting the cameras installed too. I sent a purchase order to the city manager to get approved on that, but hopefully we can be able to get those installed. It'll take about 2.5 weeks for those cameras to come back and get those installed, but we should have those up and running pretty soon. So it'll be 13 cameras, and we may need additional cameras after that. That would have to be approved probably by the city manager and city council to get additional cameras. But this at least get us started somewhere.
I think we're ready to talk about the master plan.
Yeah. So, as you know, we can go on. I know we sent the text, and I know it's hard printing out or whatever, but we brought.
Oh, I see all that.
Yeah, you did it too.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. What it does is shows what else is going back with the appendices and so forth. It was a rough draft. Yeah, well, I think, is it single?
Yeah.
It's single-sided, right?
Yeah.
Rather than going
Yeah.
double-sided.
Okay, well,
That's my fault. I fought with the
Yeah.
printer.
But eventually it'll be, well, that.
Yeah.
It's only 30 pages, since that's what it was supposed to be in terms of a summary. So a little bit, I just want to refresh your memory with the recommendations real fast, and then we're going to get in the action plan and see where we can make adjustments to priorities. Because I think last time with the preliminary recommendations, and I know you guys had worked in prioritizing the CIP, and then eventually it was finished, and I used, you'll see, I mean, if you already haven't seen it in a report, CIP document to build our additional proposals to, at least through 2029, because after that, if you want to say it's after the fact. So we'll step through that, and then from that, we'll try to get edits and so forth, at least for council, get it back to council on Friday. And then, and I don't know if this is general operating procedure for the city, but we have done it, for instance, in Chapel Hill and so forth. There were edits and so forth for spellings, you know, punctuation, items like that, that could still be fixed later to format the final document. What we really want to do is make sure that council is aware of the actions that they're wanting to move forward. Okay, and my mouse doesn't like this location.
And to give you a little bit of background, what we're trying to do is he's going to present this. He already gave us the final. We'll submit to Adrian Friday if y'all approve it, and then it'll go to City Council for the August 5th City Council meeting.
I'll ask one thing here with Adrian and them too, with you. Do they want the they want the full document, I'm sure.
They want the full document.
And that's fine. But do they want a presentation also, meaning
they want
to be delivered with?
They want a presentation, but a very limited presentation.
And we understand that,
yeah,
about the 15 minutes when we're there. I meant, do they want the presentation?
Just a summary. Just a summary.
To see it. Okay.
Just a brief
That's
summary.
In other words, they're not asking that I send them my PowerPoint.
They want this. They want this, but they want just a summary at the City Council meeting.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. I think I just blew off there. So where we are, we're at the action implementation. If you recall from when we did, what are the 5 steps that we were going through, you know, revising demographics, doing the existing facilities, et cetera, et cetera. We did a presentation for the recommendations. I won't go into all of the background of the needs that we categorized, but basically we went about and we said, here's what your role is. We also identified the roles for other people in the area that you either compete with or partner with, is one way to look at it. So with that, you know, what was your role? Basically community parks, neighborhood parks, mini parks, and special facilities. Same thing you've been doing, actually been doing it real well, because you were going to find, as you saw when we did the fallout for moving forward with action, most of that you had in the works because of the 5-year CIP program that the city uses. So, like I said, we did roles for other providers to say, this is how we mesh. So then we got into the recommendations on the types of parks. We had the hierarchy of parks, big parks to little parks, if you will, and then special facilities. The regional parks, you're not in that business. As we said, you're going to concentrate on community parks, special facilities, neighborhood parks, mini parks, etc. District parks, we saw that as the county's responsibility. And where they are right now, the county's doing a good job in providing access to acreage, open space, if you will, and also facilities by time. And that's just looking at standards again. We did have them as part of a focus group meeting and got input from them. But basically where we're at there is they're providing facilities within the proximity of the town to use. And they actually even provide a community facility in the north part that kind of operates as a neighborhood facility up there right now. So with neighborhood parks, we talked about all the there's a lot of improvements being done to parks. Those are itemized with the CIP. but also what we're saying is that you need at least 2 new neighborhood parks. And if you look at the map at the back of your program or whatever, there are 2 of the smaller solid circles. One down where McLean, and the other being how it works in with the South Fork plan. Okay, and those are neighborhood facilities that you're going to look at. Again, tell you how well you guys were doing the planning. Planning had looked at the South Fork area plan, had said, hey, as part of this location, you need to have a park. Good idea. We're going to follow through. When it came to lower or smaller parks, mini parks, we don't see purchasing being an important aspect. I think that's where you want to barter, if you will, to look at neighborhood and partnership associations and city property to look for those types of parks. Because they probably work better at happenstance or need by, I'll say that you find new merchants in a different area and they talk about, hey, we got a little bit of open space that you can use. Can we turn it into a seating area? Maybe it becomes a bocce court. There are all kinds of things that we can do.
In your efforts to get us to lower,
Yep.
I think you have skipped over community parks.
Did I?
Just in that very
Oh, crap. Thank you. I was in a rush.
Well, they're doing
That's an
some of that.
important one because it's the big circle down there, and it actually has to do with you have land for a community park. We've all had discussions about that property. Gaither probably isn't suited for athletics. What it's probably suited for, if you do hang on to it, is a more passive use, quite possibly to be used for, and I'll just call it camps, for picnic shelters. And by camps, it might be for summer camp purposes. In other words, using the shelters for summer camps. Maybe have what we call an indoor shelter, a covered shelter with screening and so forth. Sometimes it's ventilated, that you can use for day camps and probably meets better state standards for children. So that's where we see Gaither, but it's important to still work with the schools on the middle school side, and if not, what we're hoping is this is occurring at the end of the planning period, is whether or not utilities begin to be extended out that way, Gaither becomes more valuable, either for a land swap or for easier to develop. Because right now, the most important things of developing the Gaither site, other than the restrictions that it has on itself from TOPO for sports, are utilities. Because that would really move it. Now, money-wise, you still have a pocket of money sitting there for a community park, which was wise to do. It just moved, what I saw in the CIP, it moved down the list. Okay? We talked about neighborhood parks, mini parks. Greenways and bikeways, there was a lot of planning already done because of the development for Abbey, for the rail trail, those type of things. But there's also discussion about what's going on for the Seven Oaks Trail and what's going on privately, and then the park itself and becoming a trailhead and connecting to it, which is our neighborhood park. The Carolina Thread Trail has done a lot of proposed connections with other communities that go through this town. So that helps in that they've planned for you to connect with your neighbors. And now it's a matter of, how do we best connect with our neighbors? And one of the things that probably came out of that is how Rocky Branch can help with that. Because you've got some trails going on. It may be a little more difficult to look at multi-purpose trails when you have a lot of mountain bikes and so forth running around. That's the difficulty. But the land is situated where it touches not only existing parks, but it also goes over to the high school and Cramerton in particular. So the only other recommendation we had in there was about multi-purpose, I guess, I forget what you guys were, the modal streetscape and so forth.
Yeah,
For-
well, it's pretty good for you.
Yeah. Throughout, we had, always talked about a recreation center. That's still a recommendation, and its priority did go up slightly high, as you know, through the focus group meetings, through the survey information. One of the things that was probably surprising is it didn't rank as high as the splash park in terms of the survey recommendation. More people were pushing for swimming or a splash park. So, talking about the Ford Center, I know there's plans to do a study on what it's going to take to do that. But what we've done in there is that we understand that if you are going to reuse it or replace it, a facility, it's going to take longer. And if you noticed in the development program, we've allotted funds in there for that. So then, all the fine work that was done, in fact, projects that you were talking about from today, the sidewalk replacement, the pavilion, and the embankment enhancement, those were the top 3 projects in the CIP that was presented for 1920, and they're underway. So those recommendations were there. And also came about in all the meetings that we had. So this list that you're seeing, and also in there, is to identify what you have already put in your 5-year program. Right? And then if you looked at the back of our report, there's a table, 5.1, that says, okay, here's all those projects, how they fall out, and kind of a timeline that goes with it. But what is it we forgot? Okay, and, oop, I think I put a slide in the wrong location. In doing that, the action plan says, okay, we've identified almost $26.5 million worth of improvements. Of those, existing park improvements were around 4.5. New park improvements were almost 20. And miscellaneous projects were dealt with a vehicle, or vehicles rather, for vans, and then the security cameras that you just talked about were kind of the others. So in the action plan, we say, okay, we've identified all these projects and how much they cost. How do you go about getting the money? I think we just reinforce what is already within your program, how you go about funding, whether you're doing it with general fund allocations, whether we're going to do it through bonds, revenue bonds, or an option that doesn't have too much, whether, like we had asked the question about a special use tax or a tax to be allocated, whether or not a foundation is created, where you use foundation and go after funds and grants and so forth, whether they be state, federal, local, or local foundations. So what we said here is, these are the sources for you to find capital funding, also for program funding in some regards. And I just identify them without saying you need to strive to have $700,000 from this pocket, $400,000 from that pocket. Looking at staff needs, the biggest thing that's going to happen there, we identified 7 positions. Of those, 2 are really new positions. In other words, all of the other positions tend to fall. Is it there? No, it's not in there. I guess we could wind it out. The 7 positions that we identified, so you understand, are right now you're separated into athletics and programs. And when we go to development of a recreation center, that's probably a standalone item where you'll have someone who will be a supervisor there. So at that supervisory level across the board, everyone will be about the same. Now, those are existing positions because you already have a position called a supervisor, a program supervisor. Where we don't have one right now is as an athletic supervisor. We have a recreation specialist doing that work right now. But as your programs and that begin to grow, that's where the athletic supervisor will fit in. So below that, when we talk about a new, I'm sorry, I had those swapped. Yeah, I'm dyslexic, I think. Yeah, they're really showed up in here and not here. Yes, thank you. So the other is the administrative assistant for the rec center. And we identified, there's a current position right now being filled for the office manager, admin person within the department. And rather than show that as a future, we said since it was already in 1920 be coming on, we'd show it as existing. So then with a recreation center supervisor, we'll have a program supervisor. That's the one where we're flipping a program, recreation specialist is running that right now. And then rec center recreation specialist is basically doing the same thing that the other recreation specialist is doing with all programs, is now facilitating it for and assisting with the supervisor at the rec center. And then maintenance, custodian, technician staff is necessary for your facilities. That position we see right now kind of part-time. Now, it may become full-time later when you know what happens with the Ford Center and how the city may want to attack doing maintenance for it. And then the rent, that was our maintenance technician. So we talked about operating budgets, and right now, when we look at operating budgets, you know, and you extract them out for years, you bring on a facility and start to want to know what is it going to cost for us to maintain and run those. And that's why we put in there a table that says, here's what you can expect in annual expenses as a range, and what is the potential revenue. And one of the things that we had a discussion with Zip about, and I was quietly surprised, is when it comes to revenues, he's done real well. The department has done well with having a return last 4 years around 25%, between 20 and 25%, which is pretty good. To say what North Carolina on average, good departments who feel strongly that they're doing well with revenue, replenishment, if you will, they're doing 25%, maybe 30. Individual facilities may be in the 40, 50, and 60 range. But the other way that you look at them is there are also cities that have separate funds that run parks. A good example of that would be Greensboro with Bryant, because that actually is a separate city operational fund that is self-sustaining, maintenance, etc. That's a little bit different. That's why they're 100%. So with that, when we talked about earned income, we're talking about the 25%, doing $125,000 a year. So now we put together a revenue plan to move forward, and you guys have been doing this. We're just saying continue to do that. And what that does is said, I still have the recreation superintendent in here, but you know, how is it that we can fortify that? You know, do we look at actually earmarking percentages as we move forward of general tax revenue, limited option or special taxes? You know, where can we look for foundation money or grants and assistance and set those targets? And then the last thing that we show is there's a host of alternative methods. In fact, some of them I don't call alternative any longer because they're already in the line, and one of those is the hospitality tax. That's a good example. I know the county and you probably get benefit some pieces of the hospitality tax by what hotels are in your community, and they can be used for tourism and recreation. But there are a list of those, and the intent here isn't to say one is better than the other, it's for you to decide. And then that grand sheet, that was the fallout of all the numbers. And as you can see, There were only, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to zoom in here. Yes. Almost. If you look, we're really talking about one of the items that we missed was a dog park. We made that recommendation. The recommendation, and it was good that it did come out in that meeting, that we were planning to do it at a park that would kind of be a conflict. We had originally talked about whether Rotten Field could be half dog park and renovated for multi-purpose field use, and then maybe connect back over the railroad and that to Gant. And I think from Gant, you would go right up to Crescent. We made some references to that in the plan about connections. But the water treatment property makes a lot of sense. And I know that was sent to us about there's either 2 or 3 acres on the corner of 10th. Is it 10th and 12th? I think it is. It's a shaded area. I think there's some gravel that they use for staging or parking in there right now. But that makes a lot of sense for that property as a park, especially when you think about the rec center being now proposed just next to where City Hall is moving to, and with the park across the street, whether it's this place where the splash pad occurs, or whether it gets incorporated with the actual recreation center, is something that you can think through as you go through the planning of those individual parks. But the next were all the river access points. And most of that was to carry on with, you had an acquisition in Abbey Point, and whether some development could occur there. We had a proposed access point in the South Fork River Park. Another was adding money for the rehab. I don't know, I didn't see in the budget whether there was money already allocated in, I don't know whether it was city administration or one of the other funds, whether they had added anything in there to do a study of Ford Center, just to find out, what is really the best thing to do with it. More so from a structural standpoint and expansion standpoint, because with the trail going by there, with the rail trail connecting there, it offers a good location for some revenue. I mean, it actually is a point where, depending what goes on there, you could have concessions being run from there also. You could even have bike rentals being run. That's another way to look at it. Or a concession for a bike rental. But that's why I think it needs to be, and then what we did is we allocated $1.1 million for renovation right now. Well, $1.1 million doesn't do what it used to do. But depending on, it's maybe not so much the, guess I ran out of time. Let's see. I don't know what that's about. Solstice now minimized, got it. With that in mind, I guess we could talk about the numbers, because that's really, when it times out, what did you Sharon, yes, Mom.
Well, we disconnected.
Yeah, he had to restart it for us to connect. It was just that. Yeah, I have to find it now.
It's just,
I have the touch, so.
It's just that.
everybody has a copy.
The big copy of the cost. And so I've color coded them first just because the year that they start is where I wanted to make sure I had the proper understanding also when I was writing in the text the priorities. That a lot of times what happens is the priorities, you guys already had the priorities set. Whereas in a lot of times, what we'll do is we'll list the priorities out and then dump them into Table 5.1. In this case, Table 5.1, our development program, you were very far ahead with what you were planning on doing. So it's kind of reversed. I almost told myself not to provide you that list, but we started doing that list because many people would go to the table, read the years and say, well, what project is that? Where in the timeline is that? So that might be one of the things if we need to get rid of, we can get rid of. And that's at the end of recommendations, it says priorities. We list annually what we're trying to achieve without numbers attached to them, as we do in the table. But lots of color. Okay. And you can see all we did was group them as efficiently as possible because so many of the projects were already identified in the CIP. So with that, I'll let you guys start asking questions. There's a lot of information to digest, I understand. So what we can do is, I hate to say it this way, but in truth, I think because of the way the priorities were done for the first 5 years with projects that were already set, and we were following, I think the best thing to say is, your planning procedures as the city and as it affected park and recreation was right on. There weren't a lot of, maybe that's why we didn't get a lot of people showing up at a public meeting. I mean, I've heard that from some communities, that there aren't any hot buttons that we don't feel our department or city leaders aren't addressing. I don't know, maybe someone here has a different story to it, but when I see a document that had so many of those projects already earmarked, that also came back from our input, from community input sessions, that means you're doing real well in terms of finding out what you need, getting it within this committee and then to city management to say, how do we move forward?
I mean, I just feel like this is a great picture of what the potential is. I think for me, it's not, I mean, having seeing your meetings and things like that, and that are looking for any immediate, I think that for the staff that the department has, the money that they've had in the past, and they continue to grow that, like for instance with maintenance, I mean, I think it's really well. I think they represent the city of Belmont exceptionally well. I think this is just potential of what it could be, because obviously Belmont's growth will show that, and things like having a gymnasium, multi-center, it's people who have been in the program know that, okay, we can't do certain things because we don't have that, or we're missing those facilities. But if we had that, the potential of a basketball program, of sports, or of art classes, or aerobics classes, all that changes. And then they see, oh, this was, man, we could have been talking about that, 2 years ago when we started something, or like that. So when I talk to, citizens or people, I'm just like, it's great what they're doing, but there's so much more potential. And one of the things I like coming out of this is additional staff. I mean, I think with obviously the growth and plans that there's only so much a group can do, and even though you guys are super talented, it still takes time and people to address a lot of the things that we would like that potential to be. That's kind of the way I look at this. I think my big thing is that moving forward, as we talked about at the very, very, very beginning, like what's next and how does this move into the revenue sources? And I would be curious to know, like, does the city already have specific accounts set aside? Like if somebody did have an estate that they wanted to leave and they said, hey, I want this to be allotted to a new recreation facility. Like, do we have those things already in place to set up for these revenue sources?
We do have some things in place already.
Okay. Because at one time, I know we talked about, like, when sponsorships would come in, it would go into the general fund. And then it would sit there, and then we didn't know what had gone where.
Right now, we go to the DBDA, that's that Downtown Business Association. They have a 501(c)(3) set up for us. So if somebody don't want to have money going to the general fund, and they can contribute to that. And then we would hold that and then we would ask the DBDA for that money.
So we need to look, one of the things mentioned here is the Parks Foundation, General Foundation. Do we need to look at controlling that a little more closely than what we've done through a friendly organization? Or what are the benefits there? And I'm kind of thinking also, as I look at your list of alternative funding revenue recommendations, things like concession management. As we go from plan to recreation center potentially in a couple of years, we've got a couple of years to raise money. And there's lots of different ways here, naming rights, cell towers, maybe on top of a building or something like that. Concession management, we could be, I'm not saying that we should do this, but as an example, somebody could be selling ice cream and still park on the weekend or something like that out of a cart, and maybe they're licensed through us, or whatever concession management actually means, I don't know.
Well, so you're hitting it right. Like I said, you guys have done real well, because the concession management piece and that, if you think of Mecklenburg County finally got out of the concession business in a way. And they just basically said, let's design spaces where food trucks can come and serve us. They always had that at Freedom Park, on the weekends. So, they had small vendors in there and they paid the price, and they paid both on a quasi-honor system did generate revenue. So yes, is the answer to that. I think with the foundation question, I think in creating a park and recreation foundation for Belmont, that puts you in control. Now, the management structure for that is probably the most difficult piece initially. But it's not a major item. However, when it's tied to a public entity, it becomes that how you have to have a de facto non-voting member from the municipality involved. So they have to be there to monitor and liaison, because ultimately you're still responsible to the city. That's it. So the benefit is you have control.
I was going to ask that question too, from a management perspective of a foundation. Is that, if we were to look at a foundation, is that something that ZIP would manage, or do we need to look at adding a position to be the foundation manager?
Often the foundations that I've been involved with, like Bryant Park is one, they have their own board. Because they were dealing with multi-million-dollar assets,
right,
even in the 60s, way back. And their structure really was dictated from how the money was given to the city. And you had a sophisticated benefactor. He knew what he wanted to do. The family knew what they wanted to do with that money and with that property and perpetuate it. And they set up the structure. So I was kind of at a loss of knowing how that goes about. But with that foundation, for instance, the Bryant, they ended up donating to the city. The city said, we have to run this differently because of the assets that it carries and our wishes as a community to make it self-sufficient. So rather than for it to be part of ZIP's department, meaning they're responsible for running and maintaining it, etc., what happened, there was a liaison to them that said, okay, these are the responsibilities of the city and the department, but the money, right, side of it is decided by that board, and how it gets allocated to maintenance or not, or better yet, or you're not doing the maintenance. We're gonna do it all through contract. That was all done and structured that way. And I'm sure they had a few attorneys involved with it.
But they were facilitating a gift that had already been given. So, I mean, if we were setting up a foundation to really solicit, how does that work?
The easiest one there is, for instance, I've seen friends of a particular park, right? They go through the process of creating a not-for-profit or nonprofit, creating a board and getting the okay of the owner to do that. Now, right now, you're separate. That's it. They're going to take that money with, as they license themselves, if you will, as they listed themselves, to be the benefactor for that particular cause. And that's it. It doesn't say, unfortunately, the sad thing is maybe what we saw with the tragedies of United Way, or there are some veterans associations out there that basically are stealing money. And the whole thing is 80% of their money is going to support their staff, right? So you don't have control of that in that.
Right.
And that's the difficulty. And in public, I'm not sure whether it takes council action to do it, because I don't believe they can do a non-profit entity within the city's structure. So it's always been a partnership. So I don't know whether I have the wherewithal to.
In theory, anybody could go start a nonprofit
Correct.
anytime, say, we're doing this to build a
Yeah.
park. Nobody has control to prevent that. However, if an organization were to be created that wants to partner with the city or Parks and Rec, if they were chartered in such a way where they said,
Correct.
our operating structure is going to be such that we'll never spend more than 15% on admin, or whatever the percentage is.
Most importantly is that the entity who's going to benefit from this has to agree to allow you to do that to their property, if you're going in that regard. That's the only thing I'm sure of. Is you can't just say, I'm going to be this nonprofit for the city's park at, and I'll just say Linford. And the city goes, really?
Could it be a nonprofit for a building that, let's call it a rec center, that is on land leased by the city to that nonprofit or something like that? That way the city's got control of the land.
Is that kind of how the Whitewater Center works? Like Mecklenburg County leases
Yes.
that too?
Yes.
Yeah,
They lease back,
yeah, for like $1 or something.
or whatever the,
Yeah.
yes, that is another way.
And I'm only, personally, as I'm looking at the numbers, and with a nice fat $6 million 5 years out, I could see, based on the way our run rates are in spending in general, I could see us doing the year before that and getting started in rec center, but coming up with that extra $6 million through a loan might get us there, but that's a bigger number to swing, and it's kind of like a balloon out there 5 years in the future when we don't really have to deal with it today in 2019. And if we have a way to run up to that, fill up an account foundation or something like that that helps pay for that and brings that number down, then all this becomes easier. But if it goes to the general fund, and 2 or 3 years from now we've got some other issue. I'm from North Belmont. Every time I talk to anybody up there about Parks and Rec, they talk about the property that was gifted to the city and then sold and not used for a park up there. That's the classic example of why you would want some sort of situation to protect that kind of gift. Now, I know there's other sides to that story and why it was sold and things of that nature, but it comes up every single time. And that was just, a much smaller property. Now we're talking about, how are we gonna get from where we are today with a plan? And we definitely need this. But to pull up the funding to land this thing in a few years and do it well without, getting everybody involved, buy-in, contribution, whatever it is, I'd be happy to go out and support a food truck if I knew that part of that was going to help build the rec center and.
Got it. And that's where, so as a department, you can, as an advisory commission, you can get into researching how concessions can be put together. And whether, now, this comes down to the state laws issue, whether a special, special revenue fund can be set aside for what comes out of those agreements. In other words, if I have concessions for 1 million trucks, and the proceeds that we've agreed to take from those trucks, 10%, whatever it is,
Right.
go to this special revenue fund, that has to be approved in a budgetary fashion. And that is, I hate to keep using Greensboro, but in reality, it is a separate revenue fund of the city. And that's how it shows up on the city budget. So it would show up as almost like a department.
And with the special revenue fund, then that would probably give the city options to seek financing on that fund, or at least we could track the revenue and see what's coming in, and it'd be easier to go get that loan.
That's a little above my head, but
Yeah.
thinking of banking and so forth, I would think that's how it works. I think you can use that account, you can leverage that money. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
There's always discussion leveraging money, and the easiest way to leverage money is when you go after grants. And, for a while there, I know the city of Morganton was great at it. They were really good at using what was available from community development grants, but predominantly block grants that were done for sidewalks, et cetera, and turning that into money they could use against another grant for trails. And then from that, they could take that cumulative amount, if they did receive it, and apply for a Part F grant. Later on again. They were doing that for a few years, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Greenland in Morganton. But that's how it really started, was clean water appropriations were put out there, and they used that grant money to leverage for Part F and DOT moves. So they really got kind of 3 for 1 rather than 2.
Is there when you have in Morganton, when they were working that out, or any other areas that you've seen, the person who is going out to do all that, or say, hey, we can do this, is sometimes that hired out, or is that something like
Yes.
another goal of the director here, sitting here, that says, oh, now you've got to go out and get this going?
We've had directors involved in doing that. We've been involved in assisting with that, primarily because we've always been active. Lee Anderson was the planner in Morganton, and he literally would we'd go out with a bush axe to clear so that we could lay out the green. Okay, that was many years ago when we were both young, we could swing a bush axe. But anyway, that's how it started, was he had the passion and we would go with him. And in doing so, as a planner, he was the one going after the grants. So he was hands-on. In other communities, and I know, I don't believe Belmont has one. Who's went after any grant in the city so far?
Staff, yeah.
Staff?
And that's how we do have the Clean Water Management Trust Fund Acquisition Funds.
See?
I was here for like 2 months, and like, here, apply for this grant. So
And it happened.
It's all individually,
Yeah. But
There's talk about consolidating that, I'm not sure where they're at, but.
yeah, I'm trying to think of a small community that I was surprised had a specific person doing nothing but searching and hunting down grants. And I know there's one out there and I've forgotten it, but I will tell you this, Morgantown, Lee Anderson, I don't know whether he's the city manager now. He may be. He would still be willing to tell you how he did it, who he knows, and because he has that passion. And I think you'll find that of many people within North Carolina that have been involved with the Parks and Recreation Society, and also who have evolved into city management. And there have been many of those people who have went from becoming Parks and Rec directors to town managers or city managers.
And I think that's kind of my point, we're discussing the foundation. I mean, I feel like if we're gonna go out and start soliciting on a regular basis grants and private donations and corporate sponsorships, you've got to have somebody who knows what they're doing and can manage all the assets of those and reporting outcomes from grants. And I mean, really on the corporate sponsorship side, there can be a lot of requests made on the corporate side for the dollars that have been given. So I think if we're looking at potential positions that should be added, maybe some sort of fundraising or partnerships positions should be considered as well.
I just know, temporarily with the tennis courts, we opened up an account through the community foundation.
You could have really used that.
Yeah, yes. But, and it's, it's, at this point, it's just a clean transfer just from one to the other. So, and I know they house a lot of funding for communities and things like that. But, but this obviously is long-term, something that will be going on for a while.
I don't know where the advisory committee is moving in terms of terms and all that type of thing. But I think that's one of those year-end idea generating or brainstorming sessions that you could have to say, how do we move forward? I know it's not a recommendation within this plan, but I know with many organizations, that's where some of the best ideas come from, is when they're not, I guess, in the microphone. And that they can be at ease to generate ideas.
I have a question about the hospitality taxes, because I know that there's a lot of rules around what that can be spent on. So I was just kind of wondering, how other municipalities are doing that?
Well, actually, you don't have a lot of leeway what you can do with the tax. The state tells you what you can get with those taxes. But as the community who has the entities within your city limits, when you go and you, I guess the best way to say it is when you barter with the county to get those funds, they're telling you what those funds are. What you can use them for are explicit in the tax that was put out by the state of North Carolina. And it says that anything that you could construe as promoting tourism for your community can be used. So that's pretty broad. I don't know if anyone else has been involved with them, but where I saw some money going to, they used to call them brown signs, right, for Parks and Rec, you had a brown sign. If you notice, you guys have it too. You have community signs that reflect your community, okay? And some of those funds came from hospitality tax. I don't know whether Belmont did it that way. I believe Pineville did. I believe Huntersville did. But they used it because to show where their hospitality items, parks, recs, and things like that were. So they were able to use it. Now, where it starts to get gray is when I say that I'm going to use it for a facility built. I'm gonna do the improvement for a skate park, and I'm gonna put this element in there because it can promote. That's where the issue comes down. Well, that benefits your community first and not tourism. Now, you might be able to fight that. And I haven't seen a lot of, I guess, knockdown dragouts in communities where the counties have taken issue what you've done with the money, but I'm going to tell Grandpa, the state, what you did with the money. It's
But
that
something
I
like
believe
this would
because most
probably
people are
be-
doing it earnestly. They're not doing it with, oh, that's the easy way to save $10,000 on shelter.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, that shelter, right, because it's used in your special events and promoted in the region by your tourism commission, I think is something that might fly. But it's always good to have the conversation with the people who literally are using that money also, and that would be gas and tourism.
Could that, if I understand it right, based on some of your examples, that could maybe also help with things like the rail trail happens to connect the hotels to Belmont. Literally where the tourists are going to be staying, they get access with the rail trail up by the Abbey, and then they can get into town.
And many times what that is it might be the pamphlets that are, or development of a NAM, since I'm still working with paper. Development of a NAM that you can maintain, and both tracking users, as you can imagine, and giving it back to the tourism people. Sure, right? Seems like a good idea to me.
Who facilitates the distribution of the hospitality tax? Is that the county manager or the county commissioners?
Neither. The finance director, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know, you might know more about budgetary issues. No? I believe it falls out from, in the county's budget, it talks about what they're receiving, and because it's linked to the municipality, and there may be, for instance, if the municipality has an additional room tax, of course, that goes back to you also. But the state collects it all, right? And then pushes it back out, and then it rains, right? But, yeah. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it's not a voted on issue. The budget is. But I believe the tax law is the finance director's issue. Clerk might have to.
Any other questions?
Full up.
You ready to make a motion to approve it?
Comment, good job.
I'm gonna beat myself up because you should have had this 2 weeks ago.
You may have not been ready for it 2 weeks ago. All right, so I'll make an official motion to approve the comprehensive master plan.
The draft,
The draft, yes.
second.
Yeah, and I guess in your minutes, what you may want to say is that the final draft, if you will, or is it a draft final? I don't know.
Present the city manager.
Yeah, to present, and, there may be minor edits.
All in favor?
Oh, yep.
Now, is that what the recommendation for that position?
I wrote that down, the grant piece. I said, is that something I'll leave it up to you guys. I mean, I'm gonna put my city manager hat on for or?
Well, just as, like, as another staff person, what I anticipate is that everybody, you know, we have this, there'll be some minor
Sure.
feedback of things that we want to make sure we're incorporating.
Sure.
You know, and I wanted to make sure that I read it detailed, so I didn't skim through it, so I have not made it through all of it. And that's same with other planning staff. So we might want to make sure,
Right.
like, the things that are on our mind is making sure that we at least have a mention that those, that reinforces our other plans. You know, we want to make sure that we have an update to the bicycle and pedestrian master plans. Like, that's something that we've, you know, that builds on the connection piece, right? That's in here for sure that I've seen, but.
Those positions are a few years out, right?
Yeah, they're years out, yeah.
So, like,
Actually, the closest one I would think would be coming would be, yes, well, the office manager is actually present this year. And then the rec center person, as soon as you get out of, some people like to take that person during design, and sometimes they like to do it after. I would tell you now to do it before design. Final architectural design. Not planning, which is more how we're trying to achieve. I think in the architectural piece, I think it's good to have that person involved at that point.
Why?
They're gonna deal with that space. They may, you never know, they may, one, come from a background when you hire them of having a good idea from them. That's where we find it beneficial, is we're building a park, I told you a little bit about today, down in York, South Carolina. And it's being done for the community, but we really don't have a true pulse on the user, because there are so many entities kind of grabbing at it. And a good example is, Bill does some baseball fields. Youth baseball fields, adult baseball fields, adult softball fields. We go on. We don't know yet. Okay. But because of the process they're going through, to see them at risk, that train's got to keep moving. So we're adaptive. Now, one of the questions, they did hire a person to finally oversee as a superintendent of parks right now. Park.
After all the
Park.
permits for,
Park.
maybe I'm a user.
Yeah,
But
but,
after all the permitting is done, so
Right.
that person now has no influence on
Yeah.
what is inside of the park. He's just gonna have to manage what has come through the
And-
process to this point.
so and I know I'm getting off track here a little bit, but because we're in this CM risk type of situation, of progressive management, there is flexibility without it being, multiple change orders and all that kind of thing that you normally see in a big structure. Because they had a budget here, now it's kind of detailing what goes in the kitchen. What are my appliances, what are my ice components, what are those fields that we talked about? Can they accommodate? Do I have to buy additional bases and plugs and all that type of thing? Okay, so that might be on him, but will you install it? Okay, we'll install it. But that gives them the flexibility, because it's not your contract said I had 4 of these. Now I need 6 of them, so that's changing.
So you're advocating in that case?
Yeah, in this case, it's I think it's good to get them in early. Now, you don't want someone sitting there for 2 years doing nothing.
Yeah, that's my point.
Well, so then I think in that situation, maybe if you could hire for someone who has fundraising experience, they could do kind of a dual role for a little while and then potentially look at another position.
Even temporary for a year or two.
That's
or-
that
Yeah.
brainstorming session that you have about that next hire, and those end-of-year goal sessions. What do we want to do next year? What's our big driving item?
I just feel like this is a pretty, this obviously is a huge project that was, ready to be updated. So I'm kind of like with you guys, I think if we put that recommendation in there, that it shows also the priority or an importance of that position You
Yeah.
know, that it's a priority that,
It's a different
hey,
stage, yeah.
Yeah, instead of just an end of the year talk between us.
Changes the cost recovery percentages potentially
Yeah,
significantly.
let's talk about,
Your motion.
okay, so in this, so you can see where we have an office manager up there by the Parks and Recreation Director. On the far right, kind of a brown box. Right there.
Yeah.
I bet I have a pointer. Use some technologies.
Yeah, but let me say this, normally when you hire a grant writer, it just don't be just for the recreation department, it'd be for the whole city in
for-
general. Right, so it'd be a separate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
several of them.
Like the city of Gastonia got 2 grant writers for the city, not
And I
for
would
the
say it needs
recreation
to not just
department.
be a grant writer either. They need to be comprehensive fund development.
So, do you know if that's like in the works? Because what this could come out is a recommendation that the city explores that.
For a grant writer.
And the city
Okay.
may need also.
I know it's been discussed, so.
Yeah, it's been discussed,
There's a
yeah.
way to word it where you guys are conveying your support for
Mhm.
that.
For a
And
grant
it's
writer.
not necessarily has to be here, it can be wherever it's already in motion.
I'm just thinking for the future too, and if Belmont continues to grow the way it's going to be growing, you're going to have other corporations who are looking to sponsor more of our parks and our programs. And to navigate those waters is sometimes tricky. I know from working with plenty of people who work in that field, that sometimes we on the corporate side can be very demanding of what we want from an asset perspective. And you need someone who's going to be able to manage that. Whether or not you need that today, you know, is, I think, a question. But, you know, I think I would feel more comfortable if we're taking this to city council saying, we have all these great ideas, look at all of this money it's going to cost, and who's going to manage how we're bringing in the revenue to support that.
And I think too, who's gonna be the person to let these companies and people know that this exists? I mean, a lot of times if people are ready to sponsor, and, you know, if Brian doesn't send out a thing that says, hey, we're looking for sponsors, they don't know. And this is obviously, you know, big sponsorships.
Yeah, because a lot of people won't give unless they're asked.
Right,
Right.
that's true.
So a good way to look at that possibly is you have a special events supervisor, director, communicator, correct? And whether, like that position, there's a lot of interface with Parks and Rec. I wrote down grant writing, fundraising, and marketing for recreation is what we want. But I think if it's grants within the city, then I look at this guy and say, an engineering department, and how would you go about a CD? Do you work the community side for block grants? Planning
We're
department,
not even doing that right now.
right? And then you
Yeah,
work
we
with
do
this
for
guy
the
for
county where
numbers,
it's
right?
possible, so.
And you work with engineering to say what's it cost. So it's kind of going that way now.
And as you mentioned, we've got projects that overlap, trails and sidewalks, and connectivity especially being our number one thing out of the surveys.
I'm trying to think of the need. I think it's an easy recommendation within the recommendation section as an other. It's not a facility. It's more about a program or staff. And then following it up with the staffing, where we're talking about staff, is, and I'm thinking out loud, people, it's a matter of identifying the position, and that it may not necessarily be within Parks and Recreation. That it might
But
be-
eventually it could,
Well, it's
right?
that.
I mean,
Maybe
the
our
thing- the
recommendation is
thing-
to explore what we need.
Some of the biggest cities
Figure
got
out the-
their own recreation
Sure.
grant writers, like
Right.
Greensboro, Charlotte's got grant writers, on staff, but those are
Yeah,
big
they
departments.
have them within.
And in the short term, it's probably gonna, like you said, it's gonna be somebody else doing multiple roles,
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's where I guess I was looking at the chart and saying, okay, we got this brown box right there, right? But over here, right, there'd be another brown box. And that's the box that says grant writing, et cetera, with a footnote that says what we're trying to do. Now, in the text, it would describe that position as we the others. But it would say, you know, this is a position that may not be within the department. It may eventually be.
We can say that it's our need to have somebody that is
Right.
at least dotted line into ZIP, and let the city look at the rest of the org
How
structure
it-
and figure
how
out where
it
there's
evolves.
opportunities to use
Right.
that person.
What
I think we can
other-
give a broad description of what that is.
Maybe it's part-time
And
here,
add it
part-time
with-
there, maybe
Yeah,
it's,
and the text said ensured staff time is allotted for like partnership management, the things you already mentioned for Parks and Recreation.
we don't have to solve the whole city from the Park and Rec Department, I guess, is being.
Advocating.
Only security cameras.
But here's the thing, here's just what we said from the very, very, very beginning, is that we already have approval for the architectural drawings of a building. We have that for this year. And if we start, you know, being able to apply for grants, I guess my point is that when we get to the point that like there's some go buttons getting ready to hit, like, are we gonna be ready with this part? And I don't wanna say like, oh, eventually we'll have somebody for Parks and Rec when we need to start, because a grant could take 9 to 10 months. If we have an architectural drawing in the budget for this year, like, is it gonna slow us down? And that's my thing. That's really it's like, I feel like we just need to be like a step ahead.
We've got our perfect
And
plan, we
that's-
need our
I-
quick, fast
I-
plan.
I mean,
I
that-
totally agree with
That
that.
can come in under where you got the recreation center supervisor, you could put that in there somewhere for fundraising and marketing, because if you do go to rec center, you're gonna need somebody to market.
Well,
You're gonna need somebody for
I
fundraising.
guess I was going more here.
Yeah, I agree.
Here.
I don't
To
think,
the left, because I think it's
Yeah.
above that. It's not
Absolutely.
for that.
well, I think it's a skill.
Now, as you know, there are lots of rec centers who have their own marketing
Yeah.
little division.
Mhm.
In the private sector, that's pretty much how it operates, you know. We'll just say gyms as franchises.
Yeah.
No, because that's why you bought the franchise.
But I think it would be better to have someone who is responsible for grants like the Linford Park grant or Rocky Branch or, you know, Stowe, and who's able to look for grants that appeal to those projects, but also is able to manage private donations, estates, corporate donations. Like, you need someone who has a broader understanding of fundraising and municipality fundraising even within that.
This is our 10-year org chart, so 10 years out, this is what we think we'll need, I think, is, if I'm not mistaken, right? So, but we kind of have this, what we need over the next 18 months org chart. It's going to need to evolve probably, and then we'll probably need something else as the rec center comes online.
Yeah.
And then as the rec center is fully up and running, we get here, plus whatever we figured out that we need to put into.
When your rec center comes online, you're seeing the bare bones right
Yeah,
now.
that's right.
Because what's going to be support staff at that point is going to be how you allocate part-time staff, contract staff.
So maybe with all of this, we just need
Your
to figure out what we
skeleton.
need next, and knowing that we'll have to make
Yeah.
adjustments.
But you could stick that up there.
So, before we correct the motion, we are going to,
Move to reconsider.
we are going to recommend that we are looking into the future of ensuring that someone can be in a position to help manage grant writing, fundraising, corporate sponsorships. Is that, okay.
Ways to pay for things that don't involve taxes.
For parks and recreation.
look at our piece of
I guess really what we're saying, we will
Yeah.
account for a position.
We gotta have
It may
revenue
not be
come
some more position,
Yeah.
but we will describe it. Yes, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
I'd love to ask for it here though, and
He's
if
dying.
city council looks at it and is like, actually, we would need a broader position, that's up to city council. But I mean, when we're looking at it from a Parks and Rec perspective, I think we advocate for
Well,
Parks and Rec.
Yeah, let them
I
give us
think
half the head
she
count.
just
Yeah.
said, you know, one way to look at it is, you know, like you do with some things, you know, you do it and ask for forgiveness. And in this case, you show it as your staff member and say, well, that's not gonna happen. Well, then great, it needs to be within the city. That's one way of looking at it. Just show it as a position of what that person's going to do.
And if there's already been talks about it, maybe this will help reaffirm that, yeah, we may
From the
need to go
tops,
ahead and
that
do
there's a
this.
need.
Yeah.
So.
Big need.
I'm sure this
So
isn't
now
the
that I
first
said
time it's come up.
that,
Yeah.
kind of back talked it, should we describe it as, we did like the others and say, now we have 8 positions, 3 of them? Because we're identifying this position to be, God,
Yeah,
well, not want to say God, but, but,
That would be
boy, they
nice.
want to do a lot.
I think it's important to mention that this isn't hiring 8 people after the
Right.
plan's adopted. This is 8
Yes.
people over the course of several years
Several years,
and as needed in various
Progressive.
stages of time and stuff.
Yeah.
And the priority of those positions can be adjusted over
Yeah.
the, how
Based
they come
on-
up.
Priorities of the applicant.
Okay.
So I've got a position, and then within the staff structure is maybe give a hint of when that happens.
So we're gonna make a motion officially to add to the comprehensive master plan draft a position to manage corporate sponsorships, grants, fundraising, marketing, to be placed into the master plan. That doesn't necessarily mean immediate, but it is for future, specifically to Parks and Recreation.
I
Second.
second it.
Second. We got the
I hope I
second.
don't have to
Okay.
say all that all over again. Just a second.
See, unanimous.
Oh, yeah.
Vote, yeah.
Vote.
Okay.
Yeah, man, unanimous.
Do we need to make a separate motion that we are now approving?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, we
Yeah,
don't.
add-
No, we've already.
We already did.
Okay.
All right.
Actually, in the right day. Well, no.
Who's adding to it?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Well,
Anything else?
Any update on tennis court?
Yes, I can give you a quick update on the tennis courts. The
could
paving was,
ask.
I know, the paving was complete. It was delayed because there was an area of the tennis courts that would not pass the packing process approval. So, and they eventually finally dug up the area to make sure it dried out. It was a moisture issue. They got everything back together. It was paved as of last Friday. And the named brick areas has been officially finished. It was finished on Saturday. Started a few weeks ago, but finished on Saturday. So it has to cure for a couple of weeks. In the meantime, the painting of the fence will start tomorrow. And then after that, they will start the overlay process of the colors. And then, David, I just appreciate all your help. I just thank him every time I see him.
It's been a long year.
It has.
We're 6 months behind on this project.
Yeah.
Are you gonna have a grand opening?
We're hoping for September.
Yes.
Yes, and David's also planning for some landscaping to be done around the brick area, just to kind of, where everything was kind of dug up, but the new water fountain's in. The named bricks look really, really great. There's a lot of shout outs that we'll do a little bit later for people who pitched in to help do that. And I think it's gonna be really good. We're just
Find
getting
out,
that.
pick up the extra brick and put it in storage.
I think Shane got that or took care of that or something. I'll have to ask him.
Find out who took it.
Yes, I will.
I wouldn't-
Yeah, to make sure we have them, but it looks really good. It's covered up in plastic right now, and we washed it Saturday too, so
Yeah.
make
And
sure
then
it
I'll make a
stays.
proposal to Adrian about the picnic shelter.
Yeah.
We don't have that, we do have one listed for Davis Park,
Mm-hmm.
but it's down there at the playground and not at the tennis court.
Right.
So we need a shelter over the decorative bricks and the new fountain. That new fountain, by the way, is 6,000, almost 7,000.
Yikes.
So we want to cover that area.
It's a water fountain.
Yeah. There's definitely a few little things that Dave and I have talked about that hopefully will be in the future, and being able to take care of some of the things that are just really run down, but I think just some little things can help make it look really good. But yes, yeah, so hopefully soon. All right, so we're making a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, I'll approve.
Meeting's over.
Done.
We're gonna add in the shelter that we just talked about, in the plan.
Okay.
Add
Oh, I'd love
the
that.
bottom was, because the CIP already said what we said when we did the review.
Yes.
Yeah.